Olá, pessoal. Tudo bem? And welcome to the Brazil Crypto Report podcast, where we talk to the builders, entrepreneurs, and influencers from across the Brazil crypto ecosystem. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we're going to be chatting about an idea to create a common shared currency between Brazil and Argentina called the SUR. This is a proposal that has been in the news in recent weeks following a meeting between Lula, Brazil's new president, and Argentine President Alberto Fernandez. This was a topic that was discussed during their first bilateral meeting of the year, and they issued several statements publicly after the fact, and it's been since picked up quite widely by both financial and crypto media. To help us make sense of this, and particularly the overlap it has with the crypto world, I'm joined by João Marco Braga da Cunha of Hashdex, which is Brazil's largest crypto asset manager. E aí, João, thank you for joining us.
Well, Adam, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So let's go. Let's
Amazing.
do it.
So to get started, why don't you just give us a bit of background on yourself and Hashdex?
Okay, sure. So starting by myself, I'm a Brazilian economist. More precisely, I'm from Rio de Janeiro. And I started in the financial markets back in 2008 as a quant trader. It was a very interesting year for a rookie, I'd say. And then I moved to other areas. I mentioned credit analyst. I was also in the private equities and market risk, macroeconomic research, and finally investment management. And I moved to Hashdex in the very beginning of 2020 to head the investment area, which at that time it was only myself. It was the very beginning of the company. Actually, the company started in 2018 with the proposal of being an ETF provider for crypto. At that time, it was not possible to launch an ETF, so we launched a fund that was very liquid and trying to replicate the idea of an ETF. We created our own index, and after by 2020, we partnered with Nasdaq to create the Nasdaq Crypto Index to be the first, I would say, large caps or market cap weighted crypto index for institutional investors standards, and we launched the first multi-asset crypto ETF in Brazil in 2021, the Hash11. So, is in a nutshell.
The Hash11 is the second largest ETF in Brazil right now, right? Or has the second most shareholders, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the second one. Yes.
Out of all asset classes, right? So crypto ETF is actually like the second most popular in all of Brazil, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, the largest one is the one that tracks the S&P 500, and we're chasing them.
Soon, gradually then suddenly, right? So could you give us a bit of background about this common currency proposal? What do we know about this idea as it currently stands, and what are they looking to accomplish here?
So it appeared on an interview by Sergio Massa. In the context, as you mentioned, Lula was traveling to Argentina to bilateral meeting, and a few days before it, Sergio Massa, the Minister of Economy, reviewed. The Argentinian Minister of Economy, he revealed that they had this plan and they were working on it, but there's no official document, and we only had like some quotes from some raw ideas, and some, let's say, some reasons why they're chasing it. We see that the bilateral flow between Argentina and Brazil is dropping, and one of the reasons, of course, is the capital control that they have in Argentina. It's very difficult for the companies there to get dollars to buy goods and services abroad. But it's just small part of the problem. The vast majority is that Argentina is in a huge crisis in their economy. So it's natural in these circumstances that you see a drop in the international trades for the situation. So they presented the idea, no further details, just some hints here and there. And one of they mentioned that they want to be more resilient to some they don't want to depend on the dollars that much. It can make some sense, but it's hiding the underlying cause of the problem. And they also want to be more resilient to sanctions, as the ones that we saw for Russia during the war. So Russia was banned from the SWIFT, which makes very difficult for trading with other countries. So this is the kind of situation that they're saying they're trying to avoid, but we believe that there are some hidden motivations for this initiative.
Got it. And yeah, I'd like to dive into like what you think some of those hidden motivations might be, or what's, we'll try to mind read a little bit here. But first, let's talk a bit about just how this has been received. This has received quite a bit of coverage from mainstream financial press, like Financial Times, The Economist, as well as a lot of the crypto press, because there's a bit of a crypto overlap here, which we'll also talk about shortly. But is this something that people are taking seriously, or is this something that people are sort of scoffing at, or how is this being received generally?
I believe that there's some skepticism around it, because the proposal should be approved by the Congress and so on. But I think it's received with some fear in the Brazilian side. So there's the fear that Lula and the government are able to somehow approve it. So it seems more like a threat than an opportunity here in Brazil, at least.
Got it. And then as far as like outside financial media in the US and in Europe, it seems like this isn't really, people aren't really giving this a whole lot of, they see it as a bit of like a pie in the sky type of proposal. Is that an accurate characteristic? Is that an accurate way of summarizing that? Or are there people out there that are taking this seriously that think it's a good idea?
No, no one is seeing it as a good idea. I didn't see any positive comments around it. I think that, but people have to believe in or give some credibility to the proposal, because both presidents are talking about it. So
yeah,
Lula is insisting in keeping these headlines coming. He talks about it recurrently. So how can the press ignore it, or how can the commenters pretend that it's not happening? So
yeah, it's an important nuance, right? This isn't just sort of technocrats in the finance ministry who are proposing these things. This is the actual presidents, and it's the heads of state that are making these comments, not just sort of technocrat people in the central bank or the finance ministries. So I think that's an important point to point out. So you point out in an op-ed that you wrote recently in Cointelegraph, you highlighted that this idea of a shared currency between the two countries isn't new. This has been floating around since the 90s, and it's even been, perhaps even before that. And it kind of ties into this broader theme of just, Mercosur and broader integration, economic integration throughout Latin America. Could you give us a bit of just historical context around this idea of a shared Latin American currency of some sort, and then how should we be what are the motivations behind this? How should we be interpreting all this?
Okay, so the original idea was brought by Fábio Jambiagi, which is a Brazilian economist whose parents are Argentinian, and Roberto Lavagna, who after became the Minister of Economy in Argentina. So they wrote an article in 1998 defending the idea of a common currency for Brazil and Argentina for the Mercosur more broadly. And at that time, it would make a lot of sense because both countries were implementing liberal reforms in their economies, and both of them had pegged currency, 1 to 1 to the dollar. So they have a very similar monetary system, and very similar monetary restrictions in terms of what the central banks could do. So basically, they should keep the national currency, or the Brazilian real and the Argentine peso, paired with the dollar. So in that context, and it's interesting because the proposal was for 10 or 20 years implementation. It was not something to turn the key immediately and start doing. It was a phased process. And at that time, neither the euro was fully implemented. The euro was fully implemented in 1999, 1 year after. So it was a proposal that at that time it could make some sense, or a lot of sense, I would say. But the circumstances now are completely different. Both countries now have floating exchange rates, and what happened to the Argentinian economy since then, it's completely different of what happened in Brazil. We could kind of successfully implement. Sorry, I'm hearing some background noise. Can you hear it?
Let me mute myself here.
All right. So
was that any better? Was that any better? Or
yes, when you mute
it was coming from me. Okay, I'll mute myself then.
Okay, so in Brazil, we could successfully implement the inflation targeting and keep the inflation under control. And in Argentina, they couldn't. They had two defaults in their sovereign bonds. So it was a massive problem for their economy. They have a completely out of control inflation. They have a severe discrepancy between the official inflation and the official exchange rates, and what you can see in practical in the real world. Let's call it. So it's very complicated to consider the idea of creating a common economy or a common currency with a country in such situation. So they don't even have their own currency. We can say something like this. It's not far from reality. They have something like a currency, but they have 20 different currencies for a specific reason. So if you are a soybean exporter, you have a specific currency. If you are, they have like the Coldplay currency for international artists. So it's a very bizarre situation. They created like a Frankenstein economy. So how can you imagine that someone who would give hands to this economy and say, let's move on together? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of the bizarre thing, I think, about this idea is it's hard to see how Brazil would actually stand to benefit from, economically anyways, from this type of proposal. It seems that it would be very reminiscent of what you have in the Eurozone, where effectively the wealthier countries of Northern Europe are sort of subsidizing the poorer countries relatively of Southern Europe, and it doesn't seem like there's a way that Brazil actually benefits here. Maybe it's outside from like a couple niche sectors or something. But I mean, do you see any under the given trajectories of the economy that you've just talked about over the last 20 years, where Brazil's been relatively stable, and Argentina has sort of, they've veered off on their own path toward what you just described there. I'd like to chat a little bit about like, what's the connection between this proposal and, digital currency / cryptocurrency? What's kind of the overlap here? I mean, there's all sorts of people on Twitter that are weighing in with their opinions about, Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, came out and said, well, they should just adopt Bitcoin, right? And there's other proposals that people have brought up, like, well, you could use sort of a synthetic CBDC type of asset that you could use for, the exchange and the settlement, and that might actually make sense under certain circumstances. But I mean, is there an actual real overlap here of significance, or is this maybe, crypto and blockchain people sort of naively coming out and saying that, we have the solution to every problem?
Yeah, there's. When the only tool that you have is a hammer, every problem should be a nail. There's something like this, and yes, it was announced as a virtual occurrence, which makes sense because if the main objective of this initiative is bilateral international trade, there's no reason for a physical currency printed in paper. So. If it's just for this kind of trades, there's no reason why you should print a note for this. But it created some excitement around the idea, because how is it going to be crypto or a CBDC? I think it's going to, ideally, or as far as you can know from the poor information that they give us, is that it was going to be a CBDC controlled by a bilateral central bank and issued by this bilateral central bank. And there are some hints on how would they fund this central bank with part of the Brazilian reserves and part of the Argentinian reserves, and create a specific tax for these bilateral trades to give more reserves to this common central bank. But again, it's such a bad idea. But going back to Brian Armstrong's suggestion that both countries should adopt Bitcoin, it's funny because in Argentina, several normal citizens are using Bitcoin to escape from the high inflation and the capital controls. So Bitcoin is a good alternative when you cannot have, let's say, a strong currency like dollar, euro, or something to defend yourself from inflation. And I think last year they had an official inflation around 70%, which is quite a lot. And if you cannot buy dollars or some other financial instruments, Bitcoin is a natural way to protect yourself. So people are concerned that Bitcoin lost something around 70% of its value last year. The same happened to the Argentinian peso. So it's not a big deal for someone in Argentina to carry this load. So in Argentina, it can make some sense, and it's privately being built. This kind of solution, people are running for Bitcoin for themselves. In Brazil, I don't think it would make sense. We have a central bank that's working quite well. The Brazilian central banker, the chairman, Roberto Campos, was nominated the best central banker in the world in 2021, if I'm not wrong. He's doing a very good job. So once you tie yourself to Bitcoin, you lose all your power to do monetary policy, and I don't think it would be a good idea for Brazil, at least.
Yeah, it's an interesting point in that in Argentina, you already kind of have this adoption just happening naturally of Bitcoin, right? And this idea that, well, Bitcoin declined 70% in the last year. It's like, well, so did the value of the peso. So it's, who are you going to trust more, right? Whereas in Brazil, it's such a different scenario economically, where it doesn't make quite as much sense to sort of hedge to that level of extremity. So let's talk a bit about some of the underlying motivations for this proposal that you sort of alluded to earlier. And if it doesn't really make sense on the surface. It doesn't really make sense for Brazil from like an economic standpoint. Why is this being promoted so heavily? Like, why are Lula and Fernandes and their respective finance ministers going around talking about this so actively right now?
Yes, sure. So first of all, I think that there is an ideology, that a common ideology. They are both part of this left-wing bloc in South America, and Lula wants to project himself as the leader of this left-wing South America, and most broadly, the leader of the let's say the third world, or the development countries in general. He wants to fight for this position as the great leader of the poor countries. And I think that becoming the leader in South America is an important step for this agenda that he has. And in Argentina, we have the Minister of Economy, Sergio Massa, who is trying to project himself as a potential president, not necessarily for the next election, because Alberto Fernandes can run again. It's not clear if he will run or not, but he wants to be the next one in the line. So this kind of loudy proposals or bold proposals can create some visibility for him, and project him as a potential next president. So it's all about politics, nothing to do with economics.
So do you see, from the Lula standpoint here, does Lula see this as like, kind of unfinished business from his first two terms, and then also, I guess, the Dilma Rousseff term, which was kind of like a Lula third term? Does he see this as sort of unfinished business that he didn't accomplish in his first stint in power? And I guess the follow-on to that would be, does he see this as, is he seeing this as like a method to just further project himself? I mean, what does he see as a competition here? And like, what's the urgency to do this right now, given it's the first month of his presidency and he's already talking about this, where usually these bilateral campaigns or these bilateral meetings with heads of state, they come out and they issue some kind of general statements about, oh, we want to work together to facilitate more trade, and they say very, very like kind of boring, benign things that are very general and don't really mean anything. Or in this case, they come out their first meeting, and they come out with this kind of crazy radical idea, and it's getting a lot of publicity. So I'm just wondering, like, why are they pushing this so, why is he making this number one priority, like right out of the gate here?
Okay, the first part of your question regarding like the unfinished work, I think that Lula was very successful in positioning himself as a leader in the underdeveloped countries in his first term. But after he went to jail, and he had all these problems with the corruption and so on. And I think that nowadays he's worldwide seen as this corrupt politician way more than a leader. So I think for him it's important to get back to this position of leadership in order to kind of erase these corruption and scandals around his persona, and leave this final impression of being a great leader, not a corrupt that went to jail and so on. So I think this is not unfinished work. He did it quite well in his first terms, but now he's trying to do it again. And for the second part, I believe that yes, what you propose makes a lot of sense. They like, it's good intentions which are presented in a smooth way in these bilateral meetings, not necessarily are put in practice afterwards. But I don't know. I think this is something that connects with this idea of Latin America being protected against the dollar supremacy and the USA supremacy, let's more broadly. So I think it sounds really well for the public, that Lula fans and Alberto Fernandes fans, they like this idea of, oh, I'm creating a bloc that will fight against the giants, or the United States, or which represents.
Isn't it kind of strange, though, that like the U.S. and the Biden administration in particular was so supportive of Lula winning re-election, or winning, defeating, or maybe they were anti-Bolsonaro more than they were pro-Lula, perhaps, but they were obviously on the side of Lula, supported Lula in the elections. And, for Lula to come out in one of his first public statements after coming into office, and he's like, oh, we need to, rid ourselves of like the imperialist American dollar system. And does that seem a bit bizarre given the fact that the U.S. was just supporting him so heavily? Or is this all just theater? Is this all just theatrics?
I think he's a politician in the definition of the word. So he can say something in one side of the table and say something else in the other side of the table, and he go to bed and sleeps quietly and smoothly, no problem. And he do this kind of things all the time. So it's no problem. He can say something. He was from the union, and he's known for saying one thing to the employers and a different thing for the employees. So it's natural for him to play with both sides of the discussion. He's very talented for this politics.
Yeah, that is true. He does have a gift for this, right? You have to give him credit where it's due. And a couple of other just quick questions here, kind of turning back to the crypto digital currency side of things here. Brazil's obviously in the process of developing a digital real, which is undergoing testing right now, and the plans are to roll this out really more to the retail population, at least in 2024. And how might this, just for the sake of assumption that this shared Argentine, we have some sort of synthetic Argentine-Brazil sort of shared currency, how would this interplay with the digital real? Is this something that is even possible, or is there sort of a retail wholesale model, or how would this even work?
It's not clear. As I mentioned, we don't have an official document explaining the plans or something. But what I believe is that Brazilian real is something that's been developed by the Brazilian Central Bank, which is now independent. So Lula is trying to project his influence over the central bank, but as it is right now, the central bank is doing the job the way they think that's technically and is most efficient in terms of the best outcome for the monetary system. So they're not considering the politics around it and the plans that Lula has for himself and for his party and so on. So I think that the Brazilian CBDC is going to happen in its own time, and there's a different agenda. For sure, if we have the SUR, or the Brazilian and Argentina common currency, there will be some contact point between them, because if it's going to be only a transactional currency for bilateral commerce, at some point we'll have to exchange it for Brazilian reais and for pesos in Argentina. And if we have a CBDC here, it's likely that we can have an automated conversion or something like this that will make a lot of sense. And considering that this nonsense situation, it would make sense for making easier to convert from the common currency to the local currency. It would be a good feature in this nonsense scenario.
And then last question for you, and just thinking at this from kind of a real high level here, but how does this whole, I mean, we've arrived at the conclusion here that this proposal is sort of non-feasible and probably won't happen, but how does this conversation around it, these, a shared currency and potentially like a digital currency, cryptocurrency, serving as, or this being a use case for digital currency and cryptocurrency, how does this advance that conversation more broadly? Like, is this an actual, like, is this a real use case that more you might expect other countries to begin exploring? Like, is this an area where this technology could actually, fulfill a valuable need?
It's difficult to say. I don't believe so. I think that it's a very peculiar situation where they're trying to bring up this digital common currency, but it's not. I would say it's not something new. We have a CBDC running in China for millions and millions of people, and I think in Brazil we are advancing in this agenda with a very good technological framework, creating a CBDC that will be compatible with the Ethereum virtual machine. So we will have some features that will be compatible with the Ethereum network as it is designed right now. So I don't think that this case of the common currency will be something relevant or MVP or something for something bigger. I don't know. Maybe I'm pessimistic about it, but
so you wouldn't expect that any other countries might take this idea and run with it, essentially, because no one's going to be looking at this and being like, "Hey, this is a good idea. We should try this ourselves." Like, you're not expecting that anytime soon.
Yes.
Okay. Well, any other final thoughts on this, or any other context you think might be helpful? I realize this is sort of we've taken a kind of a broader conversation that has a lot to do with kind of regional geopolitics and some and clever politicians attempting to sort of reform their image and position themselves in the kind of the global and regional stage, and we've tried to marry that to a conversation about kind of the role of cryptocurrency and digital currency. Maybe two strange bedfellows perhaps here, but certainly like an interesting adjacency between these two areas. So any other final thoughts you'd want to leave our audience with on this subject?
Yes. I think the interesting thing about this proposal is that they are there for the first time in peace times. We can see some government tier 1 officials talking about resilience against sanctions and escaping from the dollar dependence, and these are like mantras in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. So the crypto guys are talking about this for 10 years, and now we have some governments or some government officials talking about this. I think this is something very, very interesting, and something that, even though it's a crazy idea, this kind of motivation is something that should be considered, and it is inside the mind of these officials, at least. So these crypto punks or the crypto anarchists, they were not so insane as some people would think.
That's a great point, actually, and these narratives around the resiliency against sanctions and freedom from the U.S. dollar and U.S. monetary policy. I mean, it's very similar to what you saw coming out of El Salvador a couple of years ago, right? Where, yes, I think the motivations there were maybe a bit different and whatnot, but it's still sort of this idea of, I mean, in El Salvador's case, they were literally using the U.S. dollar as a currency, right? So it was. Yes. like we are, it wasn't just a theoretical thing that they're trying to divorce themselves from that. But if Najib Bukele came out and said the same, some of the same proposal, it would be very aligned with what Lula and Sergio Massa or sorry, what was the name of the finance minister? Sergio Massa, right, from Argentina.
Yes, Sergio Massa. Yes.
Yeah. So even though Najib Bukele is obviously more on kind of the right wing side of the spectrum, and then Lula and Alberto Fernandez and Sergio Massa more on the left wing side of the spectrum. They're basically making the same arguments here, which is quite interesting. So,
yes.
So anyway, well, that about wraps up our time for today. But thank you so much, João Marco, for joining us here. And where can folks find you if they want to get in touch?
You can find me on LinkedIn, as you did. So João Marco Braga da Cunha on LinkedIn, or at Hashdex LinkedIn page too. I'm not in the other social media. I have no time for that, unfortunately.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for your time, and thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you again soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.